So with that being said, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. Please welcome Chancellor Robert Jones, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Provost Andreas Cangellaris, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs Danita Brown-Young, Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Sean Garrick, and SHIELD Team Chair and Carle, Illinois Associate Dean of Research Marty Burke. So let's get started. Chancellor Jones, would you like to offer some opening thoughts?
Yes, I would, David. And let me start by saying, first of all, good morning to each and every one of you. And thank you for joining us today. And I am certainly sorry that we can't be together in person as we are accustomed to. But I look forward, as I'm sure each and every one of you do as well, to the days when we can get back to interacting with each other, but in a very safe fashion. And even though we can't be in the same physical room today, it is extremely nice, very, very nice to see your faces and to have this chance to hear from you in person. And while I know we have all had to adapt to the rapid and sustained shift to virtual meetings, conference calls, instant messaging that the pandemic has forced us into, and as we've seen here in Illinois, those methods have been critically important in allowing us to keep working and to keep moving the mission of this great university forward. But I have certainly come to understand during this period just how much I've missed some of the personal connections, face-to-face engagements, and really just some of the simple routine things that I perhaps, like others, have taken for granted. That we used to be able to engage in just a few months ago. Candidly, I miss getting up and putting on a suit and tie and coming into the office, but miss mostly interacting with members of our campus and broader community. Since the lift of the stay-at-home order, I still now, for the last week or two, I get up and put on a suit. I haven't quite advanced to putting on a tie again. But the part that I really do still miss is the opportunity for those face-to-face connections. And I also miss traveling around the state, around the country, and around the world to meet with you, our most dedicated friends and donors. And I know that the past days of the stay-at-home order and the continuation of social distance rules have meant many of us are spending a considerable amount of time on phones in front of screens. And so I certainly appreciate what it means to ask you to voluntarily add another Zoom meeting to your day. So thank you very much for participating. And just as our entire world have been working to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, your university has been intensely focusing on taking the steps to keep our students and our faculty and staff safe. And I cannot repeat that enough. That has been our constant concern. And first and foremost, guiding principle is keeping our students and our faculty and staff safe. And we have been in constant communication with our community in this regard for months. We wanted to use this opportunity today to really give you, some of our closest friends and most active advocates, a better idea, a deeper understanding of the actions that we have taken today, the careful and comprehensive planning that we're undertaking as we prepare to open for fall semester. To give you some context for some of the issues we know that this year is going to bring to our faculty, our staff, and our students. Of all the challenges that this pandemic has brought to us, I think that the most confounding of them all has been the constant level of uncertainty that it has created in almost every aspect of the university operations and the university planning. Our COVID-19 response actually began even before we opened the spring semester. It began back in January. This planning infrastructure we established turned out to be the critically important a factor in our ability dramatically and to quickly expand the scope of our emergency response when COVID-19 so quickly reached the global pandemic status. I remind you, in a period of about 12 to 14 days in March, our faculty and our staff were able to fundamentally transform the way that the entire university operates and what we were asking our 70,000+ students, faculty, and staff members to do. But every week seems to bring new questions while offering no more clarity about when we might put this thing behind us. When might the world return to normal? Or even when state and federal guidance might be 1 or 2 or 6 months into the future. So when faced with this kind of prolonged uncertainty, our response can only be to expand the scope, to expand the breadth of our contingency planning efforts. And that's exactly what we set out to do. We have established an extensive campus-wide planning and implementation framework. And this is to ensure, again, safe and careful and deliberate transition back to campus operation. This recovery initiative will be managed by a COVID-19 Executive Steering Committee on return to campus operations. And it is in deep collaboration with 7 work teams who have specific goals. That these work teams include broad representation from our faculty, our staff, and our students from across the university and across all disciplines. So fundamentally, folks, this executive work team has been asked to take on the Herculean task of basically redesigning almost every operational aspect of this university. The work teams are laying out their goals, they're laying out timelines and recommendations for how we will begin to return to on-site work this summer, and how we will begin to advance our work into the fall. And as we move back to face-to-face operation and the opening of fall semester, and as we work our way systematically through the phases of Governor Pritzker's Restore Illinois programs. And while I cannot predict how the next few months will unfold, but we will intend to be ready with contingency plans to allow us to move forward, even in this period of great uncertainty. And I also would be remiss if I did not acknowledge, and I know you're all aware, that the national landscape that is so dramatically shifted in the weeks since the violent death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer, and similar events around the country, has served as a stark reminder that systematic racism and social injustice persist in every aspect of our society. So this and the many other issues we have to contend with add another layer of complexity to the environment that will be awaiting us this fall semester. We're going to be operating in a place where unprecedented public health, economic crisis intersect with the national movement to end racism and to focus more squarely on equity and other kinds of social changes. We must be ready to help our students and our faculty and our staff navigate this very complex landscape in ways that are safe, in ways that are healthy, and that advance our institutional commitment, our institutional values of inclusivity, equity, diversity, and exploration of open debate. And frankly, folks, it's a critical watershed and tipping point moment for us, where we have to really, more so than ever, step up and be part of the solution. And we look forward to the dialogue and conversation in doing so. I remind you that we are the state's only public land-grant comprehensive research university. We are the flagship university of the state of Illinois. And that comes with the fundamental responsibility for us to deliver a world-class education at an affordable price to every qualified resident who choose to join us here at Illinois. I assure you, COVID-19 has not lessened or relaxed that obligation. In fact, in many ways, it has intensified it. Now more than ever, we are challenged to quickly find new ways to make our educational experiences more accessible and affordable, and to make our university part of the solution for complex challenges that face our society. So with that, let me thank all of you for joining us today for this critical conversation, and I hope we can answer a lot of the top questions that I'm sure that you have on your mind, and we'll try to leave some time for you to ask additional questions that perhaps some of the dialogue and conversations may uncover. And one of the biggest questions we're hearing is probably one that is no surprise to any of us, and that is, what is fall instruction and the fall semester going to look like? And we actually made a series announcement that I hope you all saw just yesterday. And so I'm going to suggest to David that we may turn pretty quickly here to my colleague, one of the drivers, the key driver of our academic enterprise, my dear friend and colleague, Provost and Cangellaris, to perhaps give us a bit more in-depth understanding of what it means to return to fall instruction. Again, thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to see so many faces in this expanded Brady Bunch arrangement that we have here today. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. And now I'd like to invite Provost Andreas Cangellaris to share some insight into the recently announced plans for fall instruction. Andreas?
Thank you, David. Thank you, Chancellor. And good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. I know I have heard from several of you over the past several weeks, sharing with me your thoughts about what is happening, sharing with me opinions from the press about what others are doing, not only dealing with COVID-19 now, but looking ahead. What will post-COVID-19 be for institutions like the land-grant university we are at Urbana-Champaign? And these are very important conversations, and I want you to know that these are conversations that, as we go about planning for the fall, at the same time are part of our longer-term thinking of the role of higher education in light of this pandemic that seemed to have come to us out of the blue, as well as the challenges we face today because of lingering problems in our society. Institutions like ours are the ones that develop, if you wish, not only the thinking, but also the vocabulary that is able to change culture. And we are mindful of our responsibility and we plan ahead. But of course, as Chancellor John said, yesterday's announcement about fall semester instruction was one of the announcements we have made the past few months that was the most anticipated by our entire community. And we have decided that fall 2020 will be an on-campus semester with a blend of in-person and remote instruction. And we're working diligently to provide as much in-person instruction and residential experience and occupancy as restrictions of space, health, and safety allow. We went into this after a very thoughtful, broad conversation that involved, since April, hundreds of people on campus, hundreds of colleagues around the country comparing notes and ideas and plans, and eventually ended in a report that we posted on our web for the entire community to react and provide additional feedback. We heard from many, and the feedback was robust and passionate, and what we heard loud and clear was the students could not wait to come back. The plan will take place under the assumptions that we have adequate COVID-19 testing in place, and we have moved, as the Chancellor said, into phase 4 of Governor Pritzker's Restore Illinois plan. Health and safety will continue to be our top priority, and we will rely on every member of our campus community to behave in a way that protects the safety of the entire community. As we tell people, self-care is community health, and that is what we emphasize as we talk to our researchers that are coming back slowly, as we talk to our staff as they're getting ready to come back to work, as we start talking to our students about fall 2020. And you know very well, you're part of who we are. As a public land-grant university, it is our obligation to provide accessible, equitable educational experiences and opportunities for research, innovation, and creative expression to people from across the state and around the globe. This is who we are. We come together here to challenge and debate the known, confront and conquer the unknown, advance the frontiers of knowledge, and improve the human condition. That's what we do. And our success hinges upon the vibrant learning communities that constitute the bedrock of residential universities like ours. All of us together share in all the good that our university makes possible. Its classrooms, libraries, our amazing rare book and manuscript collections, our amazing laboratories, best in the world, our studios, our research institutes unmasked around the country, our performing arts spaces, gathering spaces and museums, all of that enable and inspire the face-to-face engagement and debate that has made our university one of the top land-grant research universities in the nation, one of the top universities in the world. This is what fosters the free and daring inquiry and the rich empathy and candor our world needs to deal with its current challenges and to change and to progress beyond them. And the events of the past month make the importance of such conversations, such engagement and experiences even more urgent. And that's why I know everyone feels that we need to come together as safe as possible in a way that we can pick up that conversation that was abruptly intercepted last spring. We firmly believe the residential experience is an important part of the growth and development of each and every one of our students, no matter where they come to us from, no matter at what age. This is what makes them the people they want to be, the citizens they want to be when they leave our university. And that's why we're working diligently to bring them back to this residential experience in a manner that respects and prioritizes everyone's safety and well-being. And as we think about it, here are some of the things we are committed to doing. We will maximize in-person classes as much as possible, especially for courses that require hands-on, active, and peer-to-peer interactions. You know, the labs, performance-based courses, the discussions, the critical thinking that is required in many of our classes. Face-to-face instruction will be supplemented by online instruction. Classes that meet in person will be in spaces that allow adequate social distancing. And as an added precaution for the health and safety of all, face coverings will be required in all campus spaces, including classrooms. Most large class sections are likely to be online or incorporate online components in accordance with the governor's Restore Illinois plan guidelines on gatherings and the size of crowds we can bring together. We will have online options for students who are not able or who prefer not to participate in face-to-face or on-campus instruction. Faculty and graduate students who are unable to return to campus for reasons related to the COVID-19 pandemic will still have opportunities to teach and engage students remotely. In order for this return to in-person instruction to succeed, everyone, and I mean everyone in our university community, will be required to follow guidelines by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and of course, our local public health district. This includes practicing social distancing, wearing face coverings, for those, of course, who are able to, and of course, most important, making sure, as I mentioned, self-care, checking symptoms, and practice adequate hygiene, such as frequent hand washing and using hand sanitizers anywhere they are on campus. We cannot overstate that our own personal behavior will determine in a large part, our access to all the good that our campus offers. It is up to each and every one of us to take care of one another. In the weeks ahead, as we prepare to resume on-campus operations in the fall, we count on the unfaltering vigilance of everyone in our community. And I know we have a lot of work to do to get ready, but I want to emphasize the community can't wait to be back. And we want to make sure that as we deliver on that responsibility of ours, we remind everybody that this is something that we share. And because of that, this is something we all need to come together and to protect. And one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to provide everyone the latest and greatest in terms of the means through which they're going to be looking after themselves and one another. And all of you have heard it over and again, that being able to have adequate testing for COVID-19, testing at scale, and the ability to fast and quickly engage those who may be infected in order to guide them to receiving the adequate attention, but at the same time, preventing and mitigating the growth of hotspots on campus is one of the things that I'm proud to say, and maybe I'm biased, but I'm proud to say, we are doing better than any other university in the nation. And that's why I would like to ask David here to introduce my colleague, Professor Marty Burke, to talk about the amazing SEAL team that the Chancellor has put together that is leading us in that effort. David?
Thank you very much, Andreas. I appreciate your insight. And now for some details about our SHIELD plan, please welcome SHIELD team leader, Marty Burke. Marty? Marty, you want to try? I think you may be on mute.
There you go. Thank you so much, David. Great to see everyone. Chancellor and Andreas, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in the discussion today. So as Andreas mentioned, we are very excited about the results of an all-out blitz effort over the last 6 weeks or so since Chancellor Jones charged us with the task of figuring out how to stand up and strategically deploy scalable testing capability as part of an overall comprehensive strategy to reopen our campus as safely as possible. It's been a tremendous honor for me to have the chance to lead an extraordinary group of individuals. The team that's been assembled, I can tell you, brings the very best of so many different aspects of our campus community together to try to do something extraordinary in this space. And I'm happy with the few minutes I have today to give you a bit of an overview of what has been accomplished and why we feel so optimistic that this can help make a very strong contribution to reopening our campus safely. So we have dubbed this initiative the SHIELD team. This is the Target, Test, and Tell initiative. And with the first slide, I just want to highlight a few key aspects. So we recognize from the very beginning, this is all about safety. The concept of the SHIELD is meant to represent exactly that. We want to create a protective layer over top our campus community that helps us get back to business of educating our students, performing top-notch research, and trying to help define the future of society as we know it through the university enterprise in a way that's as safely as possible. The second key point I want to highlight is that we recognize from the outset there is no silver bullet for this very challenging multidimensional problem. Testing is a critical component, but testing alone is not going to get us there. So what we focused on is this kind of critical three-part strategy that integrates target, test, and tell as three specific concepts that are highly synergistic. Target is figuring out who to test, when to test, and how often, using frontier data science and machine learning to do this in a very kind of targeted, strategic way. The testing capabilities I'll describe, we think is going to be second to none, with the capacity to test 10,000 people per day on in our own campus laboratory. And then the tell component is how we figure out how to get that information out to individuals who need it as fast as possible to make smart choices about their own personal behaviors to help protect themselves and everyone around them. The next piece I'll highlight is that when we tried to put this whole program together, we quickly realized that there were gaps in technology. We couldn't accomplish what we were aiming for with the current state of the art. So as we like to do in Illinois, we decided to innovate. And the I here is meant to represent not only, of course, Illinois, but that very strong emphasis on the innovation that I'll describe, which we feel has allowed us to achieve breakthroughs that allow us to achieve the goals that we're aiming for. And the last piece is, as Andreas mentioned, we know the most important aspect of all of this is going to be personal responsibility and the decision-making that we're all going to have to do as we participate in our campus activities. And so the I is also meant to highlight that, you know, I can do this. I can play my part and do my role to make sure I do everything I can to make a difference. And we also recognize, as I'll highlight at the end, that's easier for some people to do than others. There are challenges around food or housing security, different work schedules, access to healthcare, et cetera, that are going to make that ask different and more challenging for some members of our community. And we are absolutely committed to doing everything we can to make sure everyone can fully participate, do their part, and not miss out on any of the aspects of our campus has to offer. Okay, so I'll jump right in and briefly describe. We have 3 parts to this overall comprehensive framework. The target team has been working at the very front edges of data science, frontier modeling, and machine learning to create a really exciting new algorithm for prioritized testing based on a very powerful concept of calculating an individual's risk exposure and using that risk potential to help us prioritize randomized testing to help create a surveillance framework across the entire campus. The second piece is the testing component. I'm very excited to tell you that we have created a new saliva-based test. We're calling this the iCOVID test, which is first in its capacity to go directly from saliva to RT-PCR, skipping the requirement for RNA isolation and thereby enabling for the first time massive scalability. The last piece is that once this data is generated, all the modeling tells us it's critical that in a very efficient manner, that information is relayed to the individual who was tested, as well as everyone whom that individual may have been exposed to in the preceding period of time. So we have worked very closely with the Champaign-Urbana Public Health District, as well as with the Rockwire team, a new app that's been developed in complement with the Illinois app for direct and immediate exposure notifications digitally direct to everyone's phones. This is all being done in concert with a strategic partnership with OSF to enable individualized healthcare for anyone who tests positive or needs to be quarantined or isolated, so that we have a really remarkable level of healthcare available to everyone in our community through what's called the Pandemic Health Worker Program. Okay, so I just thought I'd tell you a few of the amazing stories that have led to this kind of achievement of the SHIELD effort thus far. And of course, they come back to our students. So we have an amazing group of students who have teamed up with their PIs, Rebecca Smith, Nigel Goldenfeld, and Sergey Maslow. This is Jameson Mori, George Wong, and Zach Weiner, are all graduate students here at the university, teaming up and thinking about how to take frontier concepts in epidemiology, translating, interestingly, some of those developed in animal health and translating them into human health, as well as frontier data modeling, and come up with a very exciting algorithm which allows an individual risk score to be assigned to each member of our campus community. And then there is a prioritized testing announcement that goes out 7:30 or 8 a.m. every morning. Your phone will light up if it's your turn to get tested today. And that decision-making actually is weighted based on those individualized risk scores to allow us to be maximally effective in terms of deploying the testing capabilities. The second key piece, as I've mentioned, is the testing component. So we had a very exciting head start. So as many of you may know, we have one of the world's best veterinary diagnostic laboratories right here on campus. And there's a very interesting COVID connection. So back in February, you may have heard there were tigers at the Bronx Zoo that had been diagnosed with COVID-19. That work was done here at the University of Illinois through the work of a remarkable faculty member, Lei Wang, who literally wrote the book on coronaviruses in animals. And when coronavirus came to the Western Hemisphere, he quickly built a COVID-19 test for animals and was actually the one who helped diagnose the tigers. We also have an amazing history at Illinois with Paul Hergenrother and Tim Phan, who have developed cancer drugs, which are now in clinical trials for people, that they started by developing those drugs in animals. So they call this the Pets to People initiative at the Institute for Genomic Biology. So we all got together and decided to launch now the Pets to People COVID testing initiative, where we go from tigers to people, and actually now have transformed the Vet Med Lab into a world-class frontier human COVID-19 testing facility. And we're in the final stages of getting CLIA certification. That said, we knew we needed a better test, because as many of you know, the nasopharyngeal swab test has a lot of limitations and bottlenecks. Requires actually the nasopharyngeal swab, which is not only just uncomfortable, but actually requires a healthcare worker and lots of PPE and not a lot of cost. It also needs viral transfer media, RNA isolation, and then finally PCR testing. So there was an exciting report that came out of the Yale group showing saliva was actually potentially more sensitive as a testing medium for COVID-19. And in fact, one could argue saliva might be the medium that matters. This is how we transfer COVID-19, is through saliva spread. And so there's a lot of, I think, good science behind the idea. This is what we really care about. So building on this breakthrough, we formed a team to try to figure out if we could streamline this even further. So in collaboration with Paul Hergerother, Tim Fan, Chris Burke, and Rashid Bashir, we formed an amazing group of graduate students, postdocs, and research technicians who kind of went all in. So we launched a like Manhattan Project style effort over the last 5 weeks to find a way, could we go directly from saliva to PCR and cut out all of the supply chain bottlenecks that have made it challenging. And this amazing team has actually found something pretty extraordinary. So that, as we discussed, the standard method goes from NP swab, VTM, and RNA purification to get to PCR. There's important bottlenecks and supply chain issues. There's evidence you could go directly from saliva, but you still go through RNA purification, which takes a lot of time and cost. The question was, could we jump straight from saliva to PCR and thereby cut out all of those supply chain bottlenecks and massive scalability? I'll make a very long story short, in that the team looked at a lot of different temperatures, times, and buffers in exploration of this and discovered a remarkable solution. So with level of detection now better than any of the current standard tests, the team found you can go directly from a tube of saliva, heat it at 95 degrees for 30 minutes, and then take this special buffer combination and directly turn that saliva sample into a PCR test. We just published this paper yesterday on the archive. It's already getting a lot of excitement, actually, on many different fronts, as a really important breakthrough on the global scale for how to do COVID testing. This is the epicenter now of our framework. We've also got an antibody test that can be used, again, developed by now an extraordinary graduate student, Dave Cran's lab. This is also available to us. And in the interest of time, I'll just finish up here. The tell part is about exposure notification and contact tracing, and all the best data tells it is if you do both human-based contact tracing in combination with digital contact tracing exposure apps, this is actually how you get the most efficacy. So we've done that at the highest level, teaming up with Urbana-Champaign Public Health. We also have this fantastic app called Rockwire, in which to get direct communication of test results, as well as exposure notifications to individuals who are participating. And we then have complemented all of this with a partnership with OSF to get personalized healthcare directly to individuals if they test positive. There's a home care kit and direct access to healthcare workers if necessary for everyone on our campus on demand. Finally, I'll close there. We're sending the message to everyone that the ask now is that you do your part. Get tested and participate in this exposure notification program. And of course, do the simple things like wearing your face covering, staying 6 feet apart, and washing hands. And the last thing I'll just mention is we very much recognize this is easier for some of us than for others. There's food and housing insecurity, work schedule requirements, et cetera, that makes some of this very challenging for certain individuals. And we want to, of course, as a community, do everything we can to allow everyone to fully participate in this process and thereby partake of the full campus activity. I'll pause there. Thank you so much for the chance. Of course, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Marty, and congratulations to you and your team. This is amazing work in a very short amount of time. Thank you so much. This is a great segue to our next panelist, who will share insight into our efforts to support students in their transition back on campus. Please welcome Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Danita Brown-Young. Danita?
Good afternoon. I'm so sorry, I was muted here. Absolutely, as Martin has said, we really want to make sure that we are keeping everyone safe. And as you know, within Student Affairs, we are really charged with making sure that we have a comprehensive experience for our students. I'm trying to advance here. There we go. And making sure that we have that comprehensive quality experience and making sure that we are supporting our students, their academic success, their health and well-being, and providing those transformative learning experiences. And as my colleagues have already stated, with COVID-19, we already had challenges, but the pivot really makes sure we had even more enormous challenges in the sense of mental health and well-being, housing and dining, some of the financial needs our students are facing, the food insecurity, support services, and campus climate and social justice matters. So when we're looking at our mental health and well-being, I think this quote is very poignant, because when health is absent, wisdom cannot reveal itself, art cannot become manifest, strength cannot fight, wealth becomes useless, and intelligence cannot be applied. And we really want to make sure that in order for our students to be successful, they need to be healthy. We need to keep them well to excel. That's our McKinley tagline. So we're looking at that comprehensive wellness model, if you will, the wellness wheel, to make sure that our students are healthy. Our Active Mind student group launched a survey that really tells that story about how students felt as they were experiencing COVID-19 this spring. They felt more anxious and stressed. They were disappointed and sad about the change, and they felt more isolated and lonely as these changes were going on. And so we've already had challenges in that mental health realm, but and our overall demand for services has increased. It was up 12% from fall of 2017. We've had unplanned urgent appointments have nearly doubled since the beginning of spring 2020. Hospitalizations are up 500% since last year. And we've had an increase of suicide ideations and threats among our student population, which we all know those are severe impacts on our academic performance for our students. Again, the stress, the anxiety, sleep difficulties, and depression. Our students are feeling a bit more overwhelmed, and they are really exhausted, just like all of us who are really tired of the Zoom meetings and the constant thinking and constant sitting in front of the screen. But our students really felt it with a great impact, and they're falling in this survival mode. But we really want them to be in the thriving mode, because when they're in the survival mode, we know that their GPAs flounder, they're not as engaged or connected to campus, and they don't really have a success plan to graduate or move forward. So we really want them to thrive, to make sure that their GPAs are stable and high, and that they are connected and have those plans for graduation. When we're looking at housing, everybody wants to know, how in the world are we going to house students on campus safely? Because that is our utmost concern, is to make sure that not only do our students have this residential experience, but they are safe. And so we've made some changes even with how we are going to do the traditional move-in period. But I must mention, we were still open. Housing never closed during spring. We never closed. We still housed a number of students. We had 500 residents on campus, and in our apartments we're about 85% occupancy. So we still make sure that we are open and providing housing needs for our students. Most importantly, you know, when we're doing this move-in period, we're going to extend the times. We have looked at de-densifying our hall community. So you will see a mixture of double and single rooms, and we've increased our single occupant rooms. We have set aside 5% of our total room inventory, which is about 9,000 total for the inventory, but 5% of those rooms have been set aside for isolation and quarantine if a student does get sick in the halls. And we will follow those protocols, and working with our Champaign Urbana Public Health Department, McKinley Health Department, to deliver some virtual support and in making sure that we have contact delivery for food items, so that we are taking care of those students who might end up in isolation and quarantine. And our dining services have changed. They are all on a carry-out basis, although we will offer some limited dine-in seating in those dining courts, but long gone are the days that we will have this open, limitless buffet for students to gravitate food. But we will continue our Inclusive Solutions program that works with our students that may have special dietary needs. But we have really pivoted nicely to make sure that our students have their face coverings, hand sanitizers. We are cleaning in high touch, high traffic areas of all of those facilities. One of the things that is really important about our students is that there's food insecurity for our students, and we definitely know that. Before the COVID-19 hit, we had about 1 in 3 students experience some sort of food insecurity. And we know that there was an increase with our international students and students who might have worked off campus, who lost their employment. They were definitely hit hard. And so now afterwards, we're really looking into ways that we can combat that food insecurity. Most of the, and I know firsthand because I do pack groceries and bag food for the CU Connect program at Stone Creek Church. So I do volunteer, and I do see a number of students and community members taking advantage of those options. But we are going to be launching a newly food pantry in our campus recreation this fall. So I'm really excited that we will be partnering with the Eastern Illinois Food Bank and Wesley Foundation. Our OMSA supports services that we talk about, you know, we have a need for our students. And when we're talking about those wraparound services, it's really about encircling those students so that they have the best support possible. So making sure they have mentoring, they're tutoring. That's exactly what we want. We want everybody to be involved, whether it's faculty, staff, advisors, everybody needs to be around those students to make sure that they are successful in many ways. And what's interesting about OMSA, people think it's just for our underrepresented population, but OMSA services are for those who are low income, first generation students. And we had about 37% of the student population were eligible for those services this year. So roughly around 13,000 students. So you can see there's a tremendous need of making sure that those students who are from low income first generation backgrounds have the necessary equipment, support, tutoring, and systems in place so that they are successful. I guess it's going backwards here. And then another challenge that we are going to have is certainly our campus climate and social justice issues. We know that there are heightened awareness around sexual misconduct, our racial and ethnic discrimination and harassment, particularly with our Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We know that anti-Semitism is on the rise, our bias incident reports are on the rise, and people need to remember that we are just a microcosm of what our students and society are facing. So, you know, if what's happening globally, 9 times out of 10, it is happening here on this campus. One slide that didn't really come up was our needs for our students. There is a tremendous need, as our Angie Dimmitt will always say, we do have skyrocketing needs amidst diminishing resources. And so when we pivoted to the online learning method, we made sure that we provided some finances to our students. So our students who had lost their jobs, had lost income, were worried about how they're going to take care of their family, their children. They were also worried about food, toiletries, technology. So we were able to provide some laptops. We're looking into even expanding that to smartphones. And the CARES Act provided about $12 to $13 million of support for our students. And then our Emergency Dean Fund also had provided about $10,000 of support for our students. And we will see that need grow because many families have lost their jobs. Many students are going to come back and they're going to need that financial support and other support means. So we are looking forward to really trying to reach out to our students to make sure that they are successful in many ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danita. That's a great segue. I'd like to invite our last speaker, Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Sean Garrick, to share some insight into how the campus community is reaffirming its commitment to inclusion, understanding, and justice. Sean?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I haven't prepared a presentation. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're seeing on campus and to remind us of what a special place a university really is. I don't think we necessarily need that reminder given that we're engaged in this conversation this afternoon. But if you think about it, university is the single most effective place to affect change in society, right? This is, and by change, I mean at the individual level, folks who come here, their families, as well as societal change. So what we do here is crucially important in terms of creating the world that we would all like to see. Of course, when we say the world that we would all like to see, we have to make sure that everyone has a voice and everyone participates in that endeavor in an equitable manner. On top of everything that's been going on, what's been mentioned in the context of COVID-19, folks' personal fear about their own personal health and safety, what's going on in their communities, we have to admit that this stuff has landed differently in different communities. We've seen disproportionate impacts in Black and Brown communities. Something that really shocked me when I first learned about it was scientific surveys showed that if you were to survey African Americans, Latino, Hispanic families, and white families, you would see a 3 times difference in terms of knowledge of someone who's died in COVID-19. i.e., if you ask a member of a white family, a member of a Black family, 3 times more likely in the Black family to know someone who's died, which really says that this COVID-19 really is different. The reality that folks are experiencing is very different. And of course, that shows up on campus, as Danita mentioned. Everything that happens outside of our boundaries shows up here. So the question is, how do students show up here? Well, part of that is of answering that is to make sure that they do show up here. One of the challenges that we're seeing is that high school students are increasingly likely to express significant concern about coming in fall. And again, that shows up differently amongst Black, African American, Latino, Hispanic students, and also first-generation students. 41% of underrepresented high school students say they are likely not to attend in fall, or they say it's too soon to tell. That same students among white students, about 18%. Again, if we think about what's going on in society, who are the folks who really need what we have to offer? It's those first-generation students, those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, which again are historically underrepresented, underserved communities. And then we have all that's transpired over the past month. The killings of Black men, Black women across the country. It's not new, but one thing that's new is that it's happening now, and students, young people are unable to really congregate. They're really unable to share those experiences with one another, right? They're at home. They have recently completed what I can only imagine is a fairly intensive semester where they immediately transition to work studying at home in front of a computer, and they miss the camaraderie, they miss the fellowship, they miss the ability to really be vulnerable with their friends, their peers, to engage with the faculty and staff on campus. And it's not clear how they're going to show up in fall. Again, whether they physically show up, how do they show up mentally? Again, as Danita mentioned, the services that these students need, it's fairly broad, it's fairly deep. The fact that they're missing this community and this community, this fellowship, in this time of need, it's a huge concern. They're isolated from their peers, from their trusted relationships, and also from the place where they bring their hopes and their dreams. The students come here. I remember when I went to a university. Why? Because my parents told me I had to go. I don't have anything more grandiose than that. My parents said, your brother went, your sister went. They knew what they were doing. I didn't. But I listened to them, I went. I remember my junior year, I went to the library to get a book for a paper I was writing. I made the mistake I think we all did at the time, and I transcribed the numbers or the letter, that code on the book incorrectly. And I ended up looking at a volume of translations of Dante's Inferno. I had no idea what Dante's Inferno was. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me. The fact that I saw a whole shelf of translations and interpretations of that book, that work. I spent the next month, probably to the detriment of my electrical engineering course at the time, reading Inferno and the translations of it. Now imagine what happens when students can't do that. You know, when they don't have that joy of discovery, of self-discovery, they don't have, again, that camaraderie, that fellowship to really, you know, go there with their peers and with their faculty and instructors. It's a very difficult thing right now. I think, you know, our past and our present student entrusts us to lead, both, as Marty mentioned, to make sure that they are, we welcome them back to a very health-focused, safety-focused environment, such that they can feel free to engage in the kind of discovery and work towards making a better society. You know, I think it's really up to us to make sure that we live up to the promise of the great university that we are, that we commit our resources, the breadth and depth of our expertise, our talented community of scholars, and really the scale of this enterprise, the excellence that, you know, we all know that's present here. We leverage those things for the betterment of our local community as well as the nation as a whole. I'm very glad to participate in this conversation. I don't want to talk more because I'd really like to give you an opportunity to ask us questions and engage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sean. Well, with that, I'd like to open up for questions. I want to be mindful of the time. We have about 7 minutes, but if we're able and willing to run a little bit over, we could do that as well. We'll start with a pre-submitted question, but feel free to click on the raise my hand button in the participants tab at the bottom of the screen should you wish to ask a question directly. This is a question for Chancellor Jones and Provost Cangellaris. What are the financial implications of COVID-19 on the university, both in the short term and in the long term?
Well, Andreas, you prevent me. I'll start and just talk more globally about the financial implications. And since some of you may not be aware that Andreas is not only our Chief Academic Officer, but in many ways, he's the Chief Budget Officer for the entire University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I think you all are aware of, hopefully saw the communications we put forth, and we did have a briefing a few weeks ago with one of the work teams that's a part of our COVID-19 steering committee. That particular work team has to do with the financial enterprise. And during that process and during that discussion, we made it clear that up till to the end of this fiscal year, we anticipate that COVID-19 roughly has cost us $81+ million. And I say roughly, we've tried to account for all the cost that was associated with returning dining fees and other kinds of fees to our students, which was one of the biggest cost issues that we had to deal with, which hit Vice Chancellor Danita Brown-Young's budget, I think perhaps more in a much more dramatic way than perhaps many other parts of this university. We don't know what the end is going to be for the next academic or next fiscal year, but we do have some insights. We were very, very pleased. I think it's, hopefully you heard that the governor, with the support of the legislature, basically announced a flat budget going forward for the next fiscal year. And notwithstanding the fact that many of us had feared that there would be a substantial cut. So I can tell you a flat budget is not what we had hoped for a few months ago, but given the situation, a flat budget is probably a much better scenario than we had anticipated. Now, the biggest challenge for us is, as I said during my comments, the uncertainty of all of that. Will that stick for the rest of the fiscal year? Because we know the state faces significant financial challenges. They plan to borrow to help mitigate that. But the state is probably facing on a good day somewhere between $5 and $7 billion that we know of now going forward and looking forward to next year. And so the fact that they decided to make the big decisions to keep our budget flat, you know, you can't think of a situation where you would be celebrating that, but this is one that we certainly are celebrating and certainly hope that it holds, because otherwise that 81 million plus could double at the blink of an eye. And that would be the worst, one of the worst case scenarios for us. There's still a lot of unknowns about cost associated with next academic year. I'll ask Andreas to talk about that, but knowing we have some alums who care a little bit about our athletic program, perhaps one of the biggest financial unknowns at this juncture is the cost to our athletic program, you know, depending upon what happens, whether we have football, whether we have student fans in the stands, or we have an athletic year at all, means that our athletic program could lose anywhere between 10 to 20 million in the next physical year. So a lot of unknown costs. We've invested a lot of money, as Danita said, to make sure that our students were, to minimize the impact from a financial perspective. We've maintained our commitment to Illinois Commitment and other programs, but it's a work in progress. And I'm very, very proud of Andreas, Paul Ellinger, and who is our Chief Financial Officer, and all the financial officers across the university for the outstanding job that they've done in managing the financial issues. As you remember, this is not our first rodeo. We went through this with a 25-month budget crisis a few years ago. We navigated our way through that, I think, in very fine form, and I'm sure we'll be able to do so again. Andreas?
Thank you, Chancellor. A couple of things to add to what Chancellor Jones mentioned. As we all know, our state, like every state, has a lot to deal with. And even though we are fortunate to have a flat budget for the next year from the state, we do realize very well that the state has a responsibility to look after all the challenges that they need to prioritize the well-being of people, the fact that many people are out of work. And I would say, actually, in fact, they work very closely with us to provide opportunities in terms of outreach and engagement to help those populations. So, you know, the state support and what will end up being is something that we are hopeful, but at the same time, we recognize that it's only a fraction of the funding that we use to go about our operations. We receive about 250 to 160 million from the state for our operating budget, which is roughly about 1/10 of what we have to run the university. And some of that, of the rest of the money comes from research, as you know very well. Our research enterprise is significant, and we have already bringing back our researchers on campus with every attention paid to their wellness and safety, because that research enterprise is needed. The world needs it now. You heard from Marty Burke and his colleagues what amazing things they're doing. And I can assure you there's much more that is being done on this campus that matters to the well-being of the nation, especially during these times. And then, of course, is tuition. And, you know, our tuition for next year hinges upon the number of students that will be able to come back to us. Come August, we'll have a much better understanding of what this is, but I can assure you our enrollments, our admissions look very strong. We are not any lower than we were last year at this time. What will transpire between now and the fall in terms of students, international students who may not be able to come here, or students for financial reasons that are not able to join us. Let us not forget that the financial status of many families has changed. And as the Chancellor said, we are committed to providing all the financial aid that we can provide for them to be able to come and continue with us. I can tell you that we have already reaching out to admitted students, asking them to notify us of change in their financial status so that we can plan ahead. And at the end of the day, like we did in the past, we focus our attention during these financial challenges on our primary mission, educating the students, making sure that we remain accessible during these times, and most important, making sure that all other expenses that are not core to our academic mission are being scrutinized, reviewed, put on pause. And I'm fortunate to have all the deans working with me, like the Chancellor has all the vice chancellors and directors working with him and our business people to minimize unnecessary expenses at this time, mitigate them in terms of the priorities that we have to address costs associated with COVID-19, but most importantly, additional costs associated with financial aid, and as you heard from Danita and Son, and support of students during these difficult times.
Thank you very much, Andreas. I recognize the time we're a little over, so I'll let the Chancellor offer some closing remarks by this last question. You know, Chancellor, we have an amazing group of loyal donors gathered here today, each of whom believe deeply in the success of the university and its students. How can they and others help during these times?
You know, I think if we have to do Zoom meetings for 2 years, we'll still have people that forget to unmute. Anyway, let me repeat what I said. I said that is a critically important question anytime, but particularly an important question now, given the global pandemic and the other issues around racism and social justice that we face. Both of those have really been defining moments, tipping point moments for the university in terms of how it must find new ways to operate, notwithstanding this pandemic, and find new ways to engage and really add more of a visible commitment and impact to addressing racism and injustice in our society. Some of us, and I hope all of you as alums of this great university, realize that the pandemic in many ways has been a threat to all of society, and it's been a major public health crisis. I would suggest that racism, as well as a public health crisis of pandemic proportion, and I can tell you from our perspective, it potentially serves as an existential threat to the things that we value as a democratic society. And the universities like Illinois are at the core of that. So we will continue to seek your engagement as alums of this university. You can do things like supporting us as we continue to keep access and affordability at the forefront of our mission. You can continue to support us in making sure that we're able to help continue to hire the best and the brightest faculty from across all racial and ethnic groups, and making sure that we have more women represented in STEM fields as well as people of color, to make sure that we keep our ethnic studies department strong, and to make sure that we are providing resources to keep the affordability that may be called into question by COVID-19, that no student should have to drop out of this university because we as a collective community have not found the resources to bridge that gap that Andreas and John and others talked about around affordability when both their parents have potentially lost their jobs. So more so than perhaps ever in the history of this university, we are going to need your continued engagement, your continued support, not of just your financial resources, but your time and your talent to make sure we move this university forward to be the kind of place that it has been for the last 152 years. And it's going to require a collective action that all of you surely are a critical part of. Thank you so much for taking time out today. I wish we had another 15, 20 minutes or half an hour to take a deeper dive on some of these issues. I kind of feel like we're leaving you hanging in some way, but thank you. And we will certainly be very open to continuing this dialogue in the months and the years ahead. Great honor. Thank you very much.